much, Andy. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to my talk. We're going to talk about an OWASP Nettacker project. First, few more words about me. My name is Stepanyan. I'm known as Secure Step9 on Twitter. If you're on Twitter, please follow me there. I'm also on Mastodon, Secure Step9 at InfoSec Exchange. I do come from software development background, just like many of us in application security. I'm an ex-developer. I've been leading OWASP London chapter since November 2015. So I'm a co-leader. We have two other leaders in OWASP London. I moved from software development into AppSec space in 2005. And I work as an application security consultant and architect for various financial services companies in the city of London. So all in all, I am a defender, right? So why am I presenting a talk about a tool which consists of two words, network and attacker, if I'm an application defender? But this is about network attacker. So I did not create Nettacker. I'm not the original author. I came across Nettacker first time in 2017 when I saw it appearing on a list of OWASP projects. I was curious what that is. I kind of figured out it means network attacker. I tried running it, and it's basically displayed a whole bunch of options. And I'm like, I don't understand what this is. And I tried to give it as a parameter a website address. That didn't work. I tried to give it an IP address. It didn't work. So I just gave up and I said, okay, I don't know how this works. I have no time to read documentation. I didn't know that the documentation existed. So I just didn't look at it since then. But then I had to look at it again in December 2018 because myself and my OWASP London chapter co-leader, Dr. Greg Frakos, we got contacted by the leaders of OWASP Nettacker project. And they're saying, hello, OWASP London chapter leaders. We are due to come to Black Hat Europe 2018 conference in London. And unfortunately, we cannot come to London. We have a problem with visas. And but we don't want to lose our spot. Can you please go to Black Hat Europe and present it instead of us? And we're like, yeah, sure, we'd love to help out the OWASP project, but we have no idea what this thing is, right? Can you please teach us and show us what does this thing do, right? We want to learn about it. And I said, no problem. We'll get on a Zoom call. We'll show you what it is. We'll show you what we've done. And we looked at the demo and we absolutely loved it. I said, oh my God, this tool is the best thing since sliced bread. It's brilliant because that's exactly what OWASP needs. And so we went to Black Hat Europe, presented it, and then this happened with huge crowds of penetration testers, security engineers, gathering and watching our presentation on the big screen. We said, okay, that sounds great. So I became a Nettacker co-leader and started working on the project as well. And in 2019, we submitted it to Black Hat Europe in London again, and then even bigger crowds attended the talk. So obviously, a lot of people in pen testing industry are loving it. And if you're here, you probably never heard of it. So what is OWASP Nettacker? So OWASP Nettacker is an open source software tool, just like all OWASP projects. And its aim is to assist with penetration testing and automating information gathering and vulnerability scanning tasks. It is written in Python. It's 100% Python. It doesn't run any external tools, doesn't use Nmap or anything else. That's a very frequently asked question. But it's written in Python. It can run on Windows, Linux, macOS, anything which can run Python. Another very important thing to tell about Nettacker, that it is one of the Google Summer of Code projects. If you don't know what Google Summer of Code is, it is an initiative by Google. It's a kind of a paid internship where students apply to enhance or improve an open source project which participates in this initiative. And students work on a project of their choice. They have to apply, so they have to like a little bit of essay. Oh, this is why I like this project. This is why I like OWASP Zap or JuShop or Nettacker. And they proposal what they want to work on, what they want their contribution to be, and then these proposals are rated, and then there are slots allocated by Google. Okay, and then students come in and they work during their summer break on that open source project, and they get paid by Google. So OWASP participates every year, and we're quite lucky that OWASP got to wherever it is right now thanks to many students who worked on it over the years. So it is a mainly sort of student-developed project. So OWASP Nettacker can be thought of a Swiss Army knife kind of tool, because just like a Swiss Army knife, it's a tool consisting of many tools, which are not necessarily compatible with each other, but they all inside sort of one framework, one shell. So can they all be used together? So with Nettacker, yes, you can do it. It is a collection of tools with a modular structure. It's easy to create your own modules using YAML. I think everyone knows YAML. There's no programming required. We think it's fast performing and multi-threading because it's using the Python multi-threading. So you can actually make it go fast or slow. You can configure it. And it has customizable profiles, which is really cool. So you can bundle some of these modules together and basically pull out several tools out of your Swiss Army knife at the same time if you need to achieve a specific task. And of course, the great thing, that's why you're probably here, you can automate it. You can run it from command line, GitHub Action, or your favorite pipeline tool. So a few more things about OWASP Nettacker. The quality of code is not quite there for official release. It's not even kind of a beta version. We have two working versions at the moment, version 0.0.2, which was originally created to work with both Python 2 and Python 3, and then version 0.0.3, which is the latest version, which has some really, really cool enhancements. That's the one which has YAML modules and fantastic flexibility. We're always looking for more contributors, just like all OWASP projects. If you can help Nettacker on any other OWASP project, please do. But the advantage of Nettacker is that it does have command line interface. It has a web UI. It has an API. A few people ask them, does it have an API? Yes, it does. It has a report generator, and it has Maltego transform. So if you don't know what Maltego is an investigation tool, which is coming with Kali Linux, for example, and it's a very popular if you're trying to run some sort of investigation. And it has over 70 modules at the moment. So where can you find it? That's the URL, owas.org/project-nettacker. It is also on GitHub, and that's where you can find it. And what is very important, that Nettacker lives under the main OWASP GitHub repo, so very easy to find, github.com/OWASP/Nettacker. But the documentation is actually also on GitHub, so we utilize GitHub Wiki. I know quite a lot of GitHub projects don't use Wiki. They have like a separate website for documentation, or have documentation in a different format. Nettacker uses Wiki, so if you click on the Wiki button, you will see the documentation, and there are installation instructions there. So the most frequently asked question about Nettacker is, what is it, and why was it created, and how does it compare to other scanners, right? So everyone knows OWASP Zap, right? We're at an OWASP conference. Another very popular scanner is Burp Suite. So the difference between these scanners is that scanners such as OWASP Zap will scan one website for many vulnerabilities. Whatever the scanner is able to find, it will crawl the website to discover all the URLs, all the parameters, all the forms, all the buttons. So basically, it's a dust scanner. OWASP Nettacker is a kind of a dust scanner, but that's not the original purpose how it was created, because Nettacker scans one or many, and that can be hundreds or thousands of IP addresses, networks, or subdomains. What is it scanning there for? For open ports, and also one or more specific vulnerabilities, which are listed by the user. If you're going to say, I want to scan my network for vulnerability A, B, C, do I have it? That's what Nettacker is for, and that's the name. It attacks your network, and that's what it does. And you can do it bundled in modules, which is great, because obviously you can pick a blade out of your Swiss Army knife. And another really cool thing, that it also has a brute forcing module, and that basically makes it stands out from all the other tools, because it's actually brute forcing and helps you to find things like default credentials on the network, which is really, really cool. I'm not going to cover installing OWASP Nettacker, because there are various, documentation is available, and I will show you, there's a YouTube video available how to do it as well. Nettacker is on GitHub. I will use version 0.0.2 for most of my demos today, because version 0.0.3 currently has a couple of issues, because we're still working on it, but it has a great new features which you need to know about. and I will cover them at the end of my talk. But basically, just like any Python tool, what you need to do to install it, you install the dependencies. Please read the manual, which is on the wiki, and you can just clone it from the GitHub repo and then use pip install to install your Python requirements, and then you will have the tool ready. So I've recorded a video installing Nettacker in Kali Linux. It's available on YouTube. You can go and find it. And I got quite a lot of feedback saying thank you very much, because now we know how to install. It's a bit of out of date because that is recorded in 2021 for Kali Linux Day. And the reason is that I covered installation in Python 2, because as you know, Python 2 is no longer a current version of Python. It's end of life. But the version 002 of Nettacker, several functionality works better with Python 2. That's why we offer both the Docker version, and in this video, I show how to actually bring Python 2 back to Kali Linux to run Nettacker. So it's available. We also have Nettacker on OWASP official Docker Hub. Thanks, Harold. So for people who don't know, OWASP does have an official Docker Hub account, and Nettacker is now there, and you can just pull Nettacker from Docker Hub by just running a docker pull command, and it will be there. Another important thing about Nettacker, I don't know how many of you are pen testers. You probably know about a Linux distribution called Black Arch Linux. I was really surprised when one day I was going through my Google alerts about Nettacker, and I saw a ping saying, oh, Black Arch Linux is now using Nettacker. So I was really happy, and indeed, Nettacker was included in Black Arch Linux distribution. You can see it there. It's under Automation Toolkit. So if you're using Black Arch, you don't have to install Nettacker. It comes pre-installed. Now, very important thing about Nettacker is that it is an offensive security tool, right? So just like Zap, it performs vulnerability scans, and it can do, because it scans the whole network, you need to know what you're scanning. So you need to make sure that you have permission before you scan. So today I will be running all my demos on OWASP.org, which I'm allowed to scan because OWASP has a bug bounty program in which it actually gives permission to security researchers to perform scans of OWASP.org and its subdomains. So what is OWASP Nettacker? You can think of OWASP Nettacker of a framework which basically covers 3 different types of scans. It has modules of type of scan, so you could just perform just generic scanning task. For example, port scan is the most popular one. But for example, it can do a subdomain scan, right? It can do an ICMP scan. Then modules of type vuln. So these are specific vulnerability detection modules. So what these modules do, they have a pre-programmed payload and go say, okay, if this particular vulnerability requires a particular payload being sent to the target, if a specific response is received, the vulnerability is detected. That's how it works. And then there is a cool module called brute for brute forcing, and there are various brute forcing methods available. For example, SSH brute can perform brute forcing over SSH. So I have a screen with many, many modules, and basically this is the problem. I got lost when I saw all this stuff, but I will cover a few of them so you can understand what they do. So admin scan will perform a scan of a target IP address or a website that will try to find anything which looks like an administrative console, right? So any sorts of admin, your control panel admin, whatever admin administrative functionality your application might have. CMS detection scan will try to detect what content management system is used on your target. Directory scan will actually perform what is known as directory brute forcing or dir busting. Some people might know OWASP dir busting tool. And obviously that will help to find some interesting hidden directories, for example, .git, right, or .svn or on your folder there on your website. Another one which I would highlight is ICMP scan. ICMP scan will scan your network and basically check what is replying to pings. So that will help you discover what is on your network, what is replying to ping requests. PMA scan stands for PHPMyAdmin. So PHPMyAdmin is a very popular MySQL database administration tool. And the problem is that it's installed on a lot of websites And the way how it is installed, it's either installed without any credentials or with default credentials, which means that if you have phpMyAdmin, if you do know that you have phpMyAdmin somewhere in your network, it might be there, it might be with default credentials, which means that attackers can actually use it to discover the contents of your databases, which might contain sensitive data. Port scan, as a simple port scanner. Subdomain scan is the most useful, probably, scan mechanism, because you can actually bundle subdomain scan with all the other modules. So before you do any other scan, you can perform subdomain scan and then say, okay, do a port scan on all subdomain of OWASP.org, for example. Wapalizer scan, for those of you who don't know, Wapalizer is a tool which allows you to discover which technologies are running on the target. WordPress, everyone knows WordPress, and probably you know that older versions of WordPress have a lot of vulnerabilities. So Nettacker can scan your entire network or your whole domain and find all instances of WordPress and their versions. And it can also perform scans of all the plugins which are installed in WordPress, and also can enumerate WordPress users. And again, why is it useful for an attacker? Because if you have a WordPress user with a username which matches the actual user on your network, right? All the attacker needs to do is now brute force the password, because the username is known, so they know exactly what users exist on your network. There's lots of vulnerability modules. I'm not going to cover them all. Today we'll be talking about the Microsoft Exchange CVE, otherwise known as proxy logon, because this was a very, very big vulnerability. There is actually a module for Log4j as well, so I need to have that for Log4j, but I think the proxy logon was a much bigger one because it allowed a lot of exploitation a couple of years ago. And another one which I want to cover is the SSL certificate expired vulnerability. So you can use Nettacker to scan your network and find if you have any service which with SSL certificates expired on them. So that is also quite useful. And you also have a module which I want to highlight called X-Powered By vuln. So X-Powered By is a header which is inserted by some web service which indicates the version and the name of the technology in use. For example, version of .NET, version of PHP, right? And that can be, again, useful to attackers, because then they can go and search for vulnerabilities and attack your network with a specific exploits targeted for that version. Brute force, this is really cool because Nettacker can use FTP brute forcing, HTTP basic auth brute forcing. It also has HTTP form brute forcing. So if you have a login form on your website, that is how it works. Again, a lot of people are asking me, how does it work? Basically, it just looks for anything on the web page, a form which has a form field called username and a form field called password, but you can configure it. So for example, your applications have account name and password, then that can be done as well. HTTP NTLM brute forcing, SMTP brute forcing. Again, not many people perform SMTP brute forcing. They forget that this is actually a brute forcing vector into your network because they protect web applications and web login forms. But if you have a SMTP server, attackers can just go enumerate usernames and passwords and find them from your SMTP server. Telnet brute forcing, again, getting out of date, but there's still network devices which use Telnet. And WordPress XML RPC brute forcing will brute force into your WordPress installations. So very quick slide to tell about the original purpose of Nettacker. When Nettacker was created, it was not called Nettacker. It was called IoT Scan. The original name was OWASP IoT Scan. And the authors originally were trying to obviously highlight that we need to scan network for IoT devices. And this tool will also allow you to scan the network for open ports on these IoT devices and also brute force for default credentials. I actually used Nettacker for this purpose at one of the financial services institutions in London because they said, Sam, we have a whole bunch of network cameras all over our offices. We have no idea if any of them are configured with default credentials. can you please scan the network and find those cameras who respond to admin, which I did, and I found it in just a few minutes. So that's what you can do with Nettacker. If you use CCTV cameras or any other IoT devices, and you know what is the default credential for these devices, how do you find those cameras which still have the default credentials? So that's why it was very useful. So this little logo, this little radar was the original logo created for Nettacker, and Nettacker's Twitter account is actually IoT Scan. So port scan is probably the most popular module that people use, and I think it's easier to use than Nmap. A lot of people have kind of love and hate relationship with Nmap. I can never remember all the command line options on Nmap. And with Nettacker, it's easy. Just say port scan. And then if you want to scan specific ports, you just add -g parameter, and then you just list them with a comma, which is quite cool. And this brings me to the most important slide. How do you run Nettacker? I will show you in a demo in a second. But remember the very first slide when I started to learn about Nettacker, I couldn't figure out how to run it because I run it and just returns me how to use Nettacker, a whole bunch of command line options. To run Nettacker, you need two things. You need a target. What are you scanning? And you need the module. What module are you going to scan it with, right? So, for example, here, if you want to scan one IP address, you give it one IP address for a port scanner. Or if you want to scan the whole network, in this case, /24 or 256 IP addresses, that's what you give to Nettacker. And once you provide these two parameters, it will start scanning. So this brings me to another cool thing, why Nettacker is such a great scanner compared with others. Because what you can scan with Nettacker, you can scan one IP address, you can scan an IP address range from and to, so you can basically define the start and ending IP addresses. You can scan subdomains based subnetwork, based on CIDR. You can scan subdomains. For example, you can find all subdomains of OWASP.org, and you can also scan specific URLs with HTTP or HTTPS protocol. So that is what makes it so cool. But that doesn't end here. You can actually load targets from a text file. So if you're a large organization, I'm pretty sure you probably own several domains, and I'm pretty sure you will have lots of IP addresses and IP ranges. So if you want to use Nettacker in your organization, all you need to do is basically create a text file, basically list all the domains you own, list all the IP ranges that you own, and that is your targets file that you can use for Nettacker to scan your network. So here, for example, for OWASP, we own OWASP.org, we own OWASP.com, and internally we have this IP range. And of course, what's great about Nettacker, you can run it inside your network and you can run it from outside your network. So today I will show you both, and I will be scanning from outside the network, also using GitHub Actions, because that will help you to understand how to automate it. And of course, another cool thing that you can chain several modules together. But before I go into the chaining, so the chaining is easy, just separate modules with a comma, and it will run several modules. And that is what's really, really cool. So if you want to do a port scan, and then you want to do X powered by vulnerability scan, you can just combine them. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I have my Kali Linux running here in a VM. I hope you guys can see it. So this is what Nettacker looks like when you start it. I have two windows with two different versions, version 002, version 003. So if I run it without any parameters, as you can see, it just gives you lots of information about its scanning methods, its modules, various languages, right? That's what got me confused. So what do? You define, we already know how to run it, -I, the target. So you can provide an IP address, or you can provide a domain. So for example, if you're going to say, I want to provide OWASP.org, I want to scan OWASP.org, and I want to check OWASP.org for what's the server version vulnerability on it. So no, actually, before I do server version, let me show you the subdomain scan. Subdomain scan is probably the coolest one. Okay, so this will now go and try to discover all the subdomains of OWASP.org using various passive methods. It's not actually doing any dictionary brute forcing. There you go. It found all the subdomains of OWASP, which is great, right? But that's not where it ends. because now I want to say, okay, I know which subdomains exist in my organization. What are the web servers which are running? So what I want to do, I want to perform a port scan. And I'll say, okay, I want a port scan. And I want to run a port scan on just the port 80 and 443, because that's where web servers are running. But I also want to add server version vulnerability. I want to see what is server version vulnerability. So server version is a server header, is a header which is returned by a lot of web servers to tell you which server version they're running. Is it IS8, IS10, whether that's Apache, Nginx. And again, why is it useful to an attacker? If you know the specific version of the server, then you can perform specific attacks. Right? Yeah, thanks. And then I will add one more. So you see, I am now chaining 1, 2, 3, quite a lot of modules. And I'll actually remove subdomain scan, because the way how to do subdomain scan on all the modules is slightly different. Add X powered by vulnerability. Okay, this will try to find any subdomains of OWASP which have X powered by server header enabled. Okay, and if actually to make it work on all the subdomains, I have to add -S. This is what will actually perform the subdomain scan. So what is going to happen right now is that Nettacker is, first of all, is going to do exactly what it did before. It's going to go and discover all subdomains of OWASP.org, right? Once it discovered them, it will then try to run all the modules, and they will be run sequentially. So there you go. You can see now it's discovering something. We can see there's some server version disclosure vulnerability. We can see X powered by vulnerability. We can see several ports being discovered. So the port 80 and port 443. And there you go. You can see how it works. And after it finishes, it will provide us with a report. And by default, that report is going to be in text format, but also it will be available in some other formats. So there you go. That's the result. Okay. So what is great about Nettacker, that it actually uses a database. It has a built-in SQL Server database. So none of the scans are actually lost. Yeah, I'll show you how to access them using Web UI in a minute. But also, I will show you a cool thing. So obviously, this is a text report. But you see here, it says report saved in this report file and database. So that's an HTML file. Let me try to open this HTML file. Okay, I will copy that HTML file because that is the actual report, right? So this is the report of our vulnerability scan that we've just performed. I believe there should be a Firefox pre-installed on Kali Linux. So let me see if I open this HTML file with Firefox. And in a second, you will see something interesting. You will see a very cool feature called penetration testing graph. So you can see the attack was started, and you can see that all the subdomains were discovered, and then you can see which modules of Nettacker provided results. So port scan here returned 2 ports. Server version vulnerability returned 2 vulnerabilities. So basically, the server was available on both port 80 and 443. And we can see here, this was Cloudflare, right? And you can see there's a, if I keep scrolling, let me see if I just zoom in. One of the cool things here. So based on the shape of this graph, you can see if there was something missing, right? Or for example, here, right? You see here the 3 branches on this particular subdomain, which is giving OWASP.org. Why? Because there was an X powered by vulnerability here. See, there was a PHP 813. X powered by. So why the graph is useful? Because it provides you a nice visual information about findings. And here you have your results in a tabular format, which is great. And there you go. That is basically a list of all OWASP.org's web-based assets, all the port numbers, and which server version they're running, and what's kind of technology they're running in terms of the version of the programming language. You can see quite a lot of them are using Cloudflare, where I can see some Nginx, some PHP, etc. So this is actually quite cool. So the next thing that I want to show you is, let me see, obviously I've got my demo. There is a little bit about profiles, which I'll probably cover a little bit later. One thing about reports is that the reports are available not just HTML, they're also available in JSON and in CSV formats. And the cool thing about CSV is, of course, that you get a spreadsheet. And everyone has love and hate relationship with spreadsheet, but if your boss comes to you and say, hey, can you give me a list of all our web applications? Can you give me a list of our web service? What is it that we're running? And you can say, yes, I can give you a spreadsheet. And you can just use one command in Nettacker to generate that. So this is really, really cool. And I will show you how to do it in automated fashion. And you can do it every night, every day. You can keep scanning and say, oh, have we got something appearing? And some developer accidentally or intentionally spun up a virtual machine and left it running on port 22 or port 80. So this is what is really cool about Nettacker, because that's what it allows you to discover. Now, the next cool thing I want to show about Nettacker is that it has an API and it has a built-in web server. So I'm not going to use API in API mode. I will show API in a web UI mode. So Nettacker includes Flask web server, and if you start Nettacker with --start API command, it will be started, and you can see it will give you an API key. That's very important because that's what you use to log in. By default, it's running on localhost 127.0.0.1 and port 5000. You can change it, and I'm actually going to change it because I want to be able to access this from my machine. So I will change API host to 0.0.0, so it listens on all the interfaces. Okay, and I need to make sure I copy this API key. And let me just check what's the IP address of my Kali machine. And I can see it's 176. So I can now go and try to access it. 192.132.176. So Flask is running on using HTTPS, so it has TLS. But one important thing to remember, of course, that by default the certificate is self-signed, so you will get a warning. But if you have an SSL certificate, you can install it and you can use that as well. So that is the web UI of Nettacker. You cannot do much stuff here without logging in. So it says, please log in first. And because this is actually an API server, you need to log in using an API key. So I'll just paste the API key. It says, success, your session is now updated. You are now logged in. So what you can do in API and in web UI, first of all, you can run your scans from here. And there is a web interface here. And you can go and say, oh, I would like to scan something. And you can put your IP address here, or you can put OWASP.org if you want to scan OWASP.org. Okay, like this. And then you can see our modules are color-coded. So green is for scan, red is for vulnerability, and orange is for brute forcing, right? And basically you can see everything lights up. Or you can just go and click on any particular module that you like. So for example, if I would like to perform expired by scan, I can do it here. You can see that there are multiple languages available. So if you want to report in different language, and if you speak different language, please help us translate Nettacker, because we want to make sure that it is internationalized. And they can generate different types of graphs as well. There's also an advanced screen here. Here you can control how many threads you want Nettacker to run, how many retries between connections, how many seconds to sleep between the retries, any specific port numbers you want to limit the scans to. And there's also a list of users and passwords that you want to use for brute forcing. And there are also some extra module options available. But one thing that I'm going to use here is click on check subdomains. That basically means whatever module I selected, I want it to be scanned on all the subdomains. So now if I click on submit, you will see the API call. Actually, this is what happens. You will see there's a post request going into the API and disappears, which means the engine is now picked up and it's performing the scan. Once the scan is complete, it will be visible here in the results. As you can see, I previously ran 3 other scans as a test. And you can see the results of previous scans we've done using the command line. So this is actually what I've just scanned a minute ago, demonstrating to you what is available here. And here is what's very cool, because as you can see, you can get the results using JSON or CSV. So there you go. I've just got my CSV file here. So if I go and open that CSV file using my LibreOffice here, we will get what we were actually looking for. And that is the spreadsheet with all OWASP.org assets. So there is one column here which is scan ID, and I usually delete it because every scan has a unique scan ID. But you can see here there is a username and password. Username and password columns are here if you're doing brute forcing. If Nettacker finds particular combination of credentials on the target, they will be displayed here. You can see what type, what module was run. You can see on which host it was run, and you can see all the open ports and hosts. And of course, this is great because you can just use this for filtering. And if I want to go and find out what's running Nginx at OWASP, I can just go and perform that the filter in my spreadsheet. There you go. I can see that DSOM, giving OWASP.org, and secureflag.org are subdomains of my organization which run Nginx, and I can see that one of subdomains is actually disclosing the version of Nginx, which is not good, right? So we need to go and have a word with our IT guys saying, well, we should really be hiding it just like we do with other services. So this is absolutely fantastic. I don't know any other security tool which is free and open source and can give you all your assets and perform this kind of scans. And of course, I didn't do, well, there are some vulnerability scans. So the server version is vulnerable, but there are other vulnerability modules which will scan for more severe vulnerabilities, of course. And that's what I will cover next. And I will also show that how you can automate it as well. So that's on the web UI. Now, let me return back to the presentation. Of course, you've seen the wondrous spreadsheet. Again, spreadsheets are great for project managers or for many other causes, and to have the full inventory of your network and vulnerability is important. Why? People who know Jeremiah Grossman, who is our AppSec industry veteran and the founder of White Hat Security, and he's done a lot of work for us at OWASP as well. So when we were releasing OWASP Top 10 in 2017, he tweeted and said, I suggest the OWASP Top 10 2017 includes one more entry, A0, asset inventory, because these days the biggest AppSec risks are websites you don't know you own. Because obviously, if you don't know what you own, you cannot possibly secure it. And those of you who attended Tanya Jenkins' keynote, of course, you've seen that she covered inventory as a very, very important thing. You need to know what apps, what services you have, because without it, you have no way of securing them. Now, I'm going to show you how you can automate Nettacker. You don't have to run it from a command line. You can use a GitHub action or your favorite pipeline tool. So I have the little QR here because I have a repo, which is called Nettacker Automation. And as you can see here, this GitHub action is utilizing containers. So I use Docker. So GitHub action will perform a Docker pull of OWASP Nettacker 002, and then it will run Nettacker similarly in the command line. And you can see here, I use a combination of the same modules that I showed you earlier. And I then put it into report.csv file, and it generates it as an artifact. So let's go and have a look at GitHub. So let me switch back to GitHub. Okay, so this is the Nettacker automation repo. And let me just increase the font for you so you can see what it looks like. So that is the Nettacker scan. And you can see what's cool about automation, because I can tell GitHub to perform this scan every night. So every night at 35 minutes past midnight, GitHub action wakes up, pulls Nettacker Docker container, spins it up, and performs the scan on OWASP.org, finds all the subdomains, tries to find all the server versions which are leaking, all expired by which are leaking, performs a port scan, and then saves it in report.csv. And then I use another GitHub action, which is upload artifact, and it generates my artifact as Nettacker report and the GitHub run number. And let's have a look at the actions. So you can see there's several runs of it. So I have quite a few of this. So if we look at this particular one, you can see that it was run last night, 14 hours ago. There you go. I can see it was performed at 35 minutes past midnight. And if I look at the log, we will see our already familiar Nettacker. We can see all the scans that were performed, and we can see the long list of all our assets which were discovered along with all the vulnerabilities, and they're all available to us now. And I can just go and scroll down to the artifacts and download it. There you go. And it will be, well, in this case it's CSV, but obviously we can also ask Nettacker to download it in other format, for example, in JSON, if you want to integrate it with any other tool. So there you go. This is the familiar CSV file, and that was generated last night. I'm going to show you another example how you can use Nettacker and GitHub Actions. I have basically 3 examples in this repo. There's one which is called OWASP port 22 scan. So if you are probably running any of your systems in the cloud, you know that leaving port 22 open, your SSH port, is quite bad, right? Because that allows the attackers to perform brute forcing, and basically just gives a way into your network. So what I've done, I said, okay, let me create a GitHub action which performs a scan of OWASP.org and tries to find, do we have a port 22 open somewhere? And turns out that we do. And if you go and have a look at it, you will see that here on the OWASP Nettacker, you will also notice that the version of Nettacker here is different because I use the latest version. And the latest version also says that it performs subdomain scan. And Paul, you asked me earlier what subdomain methods are being used. So one of them is, of course, crt.sh, so certificate transparency, but there are 3 other sources, and you can find them from YAML files. And you can see, so there are 4 different sources of subdomains which are being utilized. And then we actually discovered, so OWASP.org actually does have one subdomain, which is DSOM. For those of you who don't know what DSOM is, this is a DevSecOps maturity model. And it's an awesome project, which I urge you to go and check it out. But the website, which is running the matrix, it actually does have port 22 currently open for whatever reason. I'm going to go and have a chat with with the project leader, with Timo, and saying, did you have port 22 open? And I have a tool which helped me scan everything that OWASP owns and find out that this subdomain is the offending one. So that is one cool use. And then there's another one. So obviously I try to use Wapalizer, and Wapalizer performs a full web text scan. So basically it will try to find not just open ports, obviously not just versions of service, but we'll try to find things like programming languages, things like technologies, like JavaScript frameworks. So I ran it a couple of hours ago during the lunch break, and you can see it took 7 minutes to scan the entire organization, and which is pretty cool, right? Show me a scanner which can scan your entire organization networks and in 7 minutes find all the frameworks. Obviously, this particular screen here is just a log. We can see that it found it. But again, I am actually going to put my project manager's hat on and say, okay, I want to actually see what was the what was vulnerable, right? So I can now go back and now go and check if it generated me the artifact. Yes, it did. That's Nettacker report Wapalizer. There you go. Let's try to open it. There you go. And if we go and open this one, we will see that this spreadsheet is significantly bigger than the previous one. And you will see here that it contains things like programming language Ruby, JavaScript framework jQuery, right? You can see Cache Tools Varnish, right? You can see Google Font APIs. You can see payment processor Stripe. And so, oh, interesting. We're using Stripe. So where are we using Stripe? Let me go and search for Stripe. And yeah, I found that we have a domain called givingowas.org. If you didn't know that it exists, now you know. It is actually a donation raising portal. So go and check it out. And obviously, I use my awesome tool to show you how to discover it. So quickly, obviously, I've covered all this, the API. Nettacker helped to find this CVE. So if you guys don't remember, there's a big proxy logon vulnerability, and there's an article from ZNet about Exchange server zero-day flows are being actively exploited, and basically there were countries which were being hacked. And I created the module, and I published this blog post and tweeted about this, say, hey, we actually have a cool free open source tool called Nettacker. It can scan your entire network and find any Exchange servers which have this vulnerability. And guess what? I got contacted by a computer emergency response center of a small European country that I'm not allowed to name. I just say it's a small country. And I said, thank you very much, OWASP and OWASP Nettacker leaders, because we use your tool to scan our entire country's IP range. We've identified vulnerable Exchange server on the internet, and we contacted people responsible to make sure that they patch them. So this, I think it was a very good success story for Nettacker. And of course, you can do that too. So, and this is what I used. I just said Nettacker, and well, you can just go and use it for MS Exchange vulnerability. Nettacker also has Log4j module. If you want to scan your whole network for Log4j, you can go and do it. So wrapping up, what can you use Nettacker for? You can use it for asset discovery, internal and external, also known as attack surface management these days, right? And it can perform external attack surface discovery and internal attack surface discovery. It will scan your network on subdomains for service and open ports for web service technologies, programming languages. I don't have time to show you brute forcing today, but it can brute force the whole network and find any service which respond to credentials. You can also give it dictionaries of passwords and credentials leaked, right? For example, Twitter leak, right? Or any other leak, or top 100 most used passwords. And you can actually brute force your own network to find out if anyone is using these leaked passwords. You can scan your whole network for a specific vulnerability, like I showed you with the Microsoft Exchange. You can discover expired SSL certificates in your networks. You can find assets or find subdomains which are hosting vulnerable versions of content management systems such as WordPress, Drupal, and Joomla. And Nettacker can be used not just by attackers, but you can use it as a defender. Just I showed you an automated way in GitHub Actions, but you can also use it for bug bounty. So I get a lot of feedback from people who are security researchers, and they're actually saying that Nettacker helps them in their bug bounty research, which is absolutely great. So in case you didn't know, GitHub has its own top 10. So here's the GitHub top 10 most starred OWASP repo. So a star is, of course, a like. So if you like it, you should put a star on it. So please check out Nettacker and put a star on it. So currently Nettacker is number 7. It used to be number 10. We are now just below OWASP top 10. But actually, I'm proud to say there are more people who like Nettacker than ASVS on GitHub, which is interesting. In version 3, all the modules are defined in YAML. In version 002, everything was in Python. You can look at it. You can create your own modules and contribute your own modules. It's all free and open source. If there's a new vulnerability out, you can create a new YAML module to go and look for that specific vulnerability. And of course, we're looking for more contributors. There are contributor guidelines available on the website. So there's a developer section on the wiki, which I ask you to go and explore. And please help us. And you don't have to be a Python coder to contribute to any OWASP project. You can also help us with translations, documentation, and even things like proofreading the documentation, because a lot of documentation is written by students and is written by people for whom English is not the first language. And obviously help us to translate it to your language. So thank you very much, and go attack your own network before the real attackers do. You need to turn it on for questions.
Could be a bit technical. I'll just swap it from. But have you got any questions for Sam?
There's a button at the bottom, right, Andy, to turn the mic on? The red button? Okay. Is it lighting up?
Let's see. Okay, this little one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it takes a second.
First of all, thank you for the lecture. Loved it. I was just wondering, when you use the port scan feature, is it like Nmap, like it uses the top 1,000 ports or whatever?
It does. Yeah, good question. So just like Nmap, Nettacker will use top 1,000 ports, but you can give it the range of ports. If you do 0 to 65,535, it will scan everything. By default, it uses the top 1,000 most popular ports. Again, this is just to speed up the scanning.
Thank you.
Okay, is anybody at the back? Another question before I come back to the front? Anybody down this way at the moment? No? Okay.
Yo, thanks, Tim. Was really nice talk. I have one question about like security automation as a next step. So if we look at it from a defender perspective, let's say you find SSH ports open or whatever, or something very serious. Is it like, does the API have some sort of triggering or webhook triggering to, let's say, if you're on the cloud, for example, to update some IP file rules to really to reduce the risk? Or is it just we're gathering information, but it's totally up to you? What do you do as a next step in terms of security automations?
A good question. At the moment, the answer is no. All that Nettacker does, it is a reconnaissance tool, information discovering tool. So it will find it. It will put it into the report for you, but it is searchable because in the web GUI, you can go and search it because this information doesn't disappear. It keeps it in a database and you can go and search it and find out which ports do I have open? Where do I have Nginx? Where do I have Apache? Where do I have PHP 5? I recently used Nettacker to find PHP 5. If you don't know, PHP 5 is end of life and it's horribly vulnerable. So if you have anything running PHP 5, how do you find it? Use Nettacker.
Awesome, thank you.
But yeah, of course, for things like alerting, what will you do? I will try to, as a next step, maybe for the next Google Summer of Code, make sure that we generate some files for Defect Dojo. So it's our next step.
Yeah. Thanks.
Do we have a final question or more questions?
Hi, Sam. Thank you for the talk. I have a question regarding one of the use cases that you mentioned, for example, asset inventory. Is there any feature that does some sort of comparison between scans, exactly to check if there are new assets in the most recent scan?
Again, very good question. Not at the moment, but because every scan result is A, in the database, and B, is dumped as a JSON file, you can just use a JSON diff and basically find the difference between two scans. Because obviously, if your network assets are exactly the same today as they were yesterday, the JSON report generated today is going to be exactly the same as yesterday. And the second it changes, that's the difference.
And as a follow-up question, is there any good way to decentralize the database then to keep it persistent?
Yes. So again, by default, it's a built-in SQLite, but Nettacker also supports MySQL and it also supports Postgres. So Postgres is an enterprise-grade database. You can centralize it, and in a configuration file, you can define the address and credentials for a Postgres, and it will store everything in centralized database.
Hey, one question. I'm wondering, how does it discover the subdomains?
Yes, good question. So it uses 4 different services. I can go and actually tell you what is being there at the moment. So one is, of course, the CRTSH. If you don't know what that is, this is the Certificate Transparency Log. And this service will show you for I don't know, any particular domain. Again, I will use OWASP.org. Any SSL certificates which are registered for this domain, but also when you go and start registering a new SSL certificate, there is a so-called, well, they have to go into the CT log first. And obviously, that's probably a very good, reliable way of finding subdomains on which you want to put SSL. Right, so this is number one source, but there are three others. There's a DNS dumpster, and there are two more. There's another one which does a lookup based on the IP address. There's a service which does a reverse DNS lookup on all the IP address space on the internet, and again, it's a public database, so that is being used. And I think there's one more. So there are four different sources which Nettacker is using at the moment. Again, these are configurable. So you can just find the subdomain YAML file in the Nettacker repository, and you can add your own sources if you think you can find better sources. And there's another interesting thing that what I always tell people, combine Nettacker with OWASP AMAS. We have OWASP AMAS, which is a great subdomain discovery tool. And obviously OWASP AMAS is a specific tool for finding subdomains, and then use the output from AMAS as an input text file for Nettacker. So if you look at the modules and you look at the scans in our repo, you will find the subdomain, and you will see all the services which are in use. So there's a gldc.me, that's number one, certspotter.com, threatcrowd.org, URL scan.io, DNS buffer overrun, and Alien Vault's OTX, online threat exchange. So these are, and then, oh, there's one more, there's a threat miner as well. So these are all the sources on top of CRTSH, which are currently in use. And you can see it's very simple to define another service if you want to use a different subdomain discovery service.
Okay, and Sam will be around, I think, for a little while before he jets back off to London this evening. So thanks very much once again.
Thank you very much.